Security scan. Please stand by. Scanning. Do not move. Security scan successful. You now have full access to all files. Welcome to Conspiracies, Inc. With your host, Bryan Datillo. Do you believe?
I am Bryan Datillo. This is Conspiracies, Inc. Thank you for joining us for our very first season as we tackle the alien controversy, the alien cover-up, the alien conspiracy. And just a quick synopsis on why I'm even doing a show like this. I was raised by a mother who worked for the National Enquirer, and she had many friends within the paranormal. And a normal night at my house was watching people being past life regressed or hypnotized. There was a lot of ghost activity in a lot of houses we were involved in and that we lived in. And just having her around and having that a part of my everyday life got me into doing research about what I was going through and what I was seeing. And the more research I did, the more I began to understand that there might be an alien element involved too. So much so that in 1993, I was abducted by gray aliens. And anyone who knows me knows I've said that story for years. And people are like, oh, you just came out with that now? No, anyone who knows me knows I can't stop talking about that story. And it made me start this podcast. And I dedicated the first 2 episodes of the show. I was put under hypnosis by Yvonne Smith. And so if you missed that, definitely track that down. So that's what got me into it as a quick update. But also on the alien front today, I am joined by Nick Pope, one of my very, very, very favorite TV personalities in the world. It's like I'm interviewing like a famous football player or a basketball player or a baseball player right now, because I am an ancient aliens junkie and I cannot get enough of the show. And it's an honor to have you here today with us discussing on Conspiracies, Inc. the alien phenomenon that it is. And it's just such an honor. And I know that you weren't in the military of defense. You were a civilian employee for the military of defense in Britain. But I know I mostly know you as this incredible voice from ancient aliens that when I was going through a lot of, looking for a lot of answers, you were there for me a lot. So it's an honor to meet you, and it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks. And it's great to be on your show. I mean, there really isn't a time I can recall when there's been as much public and political, and we can get onto that, interest in this subject. But yeah, my background was that I was a civilian employee, as you say, at the UK Ministry of Defence, which is the equivalent, the UK's equivalent of the Department of Defence.
Okay.
In the US. So that's what I did. And I got into it actually because my father was a senior government scientist and he was in the Ministry of Defense. And so it was kind of almost like the family firm, we used to joke. So, but I was always one of these people that was like, well, you could go into business and earn lots of money, or you could work for your country and it won't pay as much, and you might not be able to say 99 out of the 100 things you've ever done, but it'll be interesting and important. So I did that.
But you must have been somewhat qualified in a way, because not probably everyone could get that job or even do what you did. So in what way were you like screened for it? Is it like an actor where you have to audition for it, or you just had a vast interest in and the connection of your father, of course?
Well, there are lots of entry requirements and aptitude tests. And actually the biggest part of the whole thing, particularly for the more interesting jobs, is the security clearance. Right. I mean, everyone who goes into the Ministry of Defense has to have a basic security clearance. But at some point, I was given what at the time was called positive vetting. I think it's now called developed vetting. That's where, I am not kidding, they go right back. They interview like friends, family. They go back all your old schools, your head teachers.
Oh no!
They delve into your bank account. They get retired cops to do this kind of brutal good cop, bad cop interview, and it's really quite surreal.
That is amazing. That is amazing. But yeah, that can you just repeat the last part about that, because you froze a little and the audio on it was amazing.
I think the men in black are trying to interfere with this interview, either that or the aliens. But yeah, for the really interesting jobs in the Ministry of Defense, you need this kind of gold-plated security review where they go back, they interview family, friends, all your old schools, they go into your bank accounts. You then have this brutal good cop, bad cop interview with these kind of retired police officers who are now doing security clearance for the government. And yeah, it's quite a thing. But I passed. Thank goodness they didn't find out all that stuff that I'd done, and I got in.
I would have been done. I wouldn't have had a chance. They would have been like, "You're done. Get out of here, kid. You're done." Okay, so let's dive right into it. Let's dive right into Rendlesham, because for me, when I was doing this project, I wanted to have the top cases that I thought were the most influential and had the most not only notoriety by them, but I think that this case in particular is so key on so many levels. But I know you're probably tired of talking about it because you've talked about Rendlesham Forest so much. But in 1980, for people who don't know, it was Rendlesham Forest in England, and it was a U.S. military base in England, correct?
Correct, yes. And this case has sometimes been called Britain's Roswell. Okay. Not that it was a crash, but it was a landing. So it's not just some lights in the sky account. This something landed.
So was it December 26th? There was a blip on the radar of the base. Is that correct?
That's correct too. Yeah, they were looking at the radar screens. Something came across the UK, and then it just pretty much stopped over the base at Bentwaters and Woodbridge. It's in southeast England. Okay. And at the same time, some of these military personnel saw this thing land in the forest. And at first, actually, they thought there had been a plane crash. They went out to investigate, and they found a landed UFO, sort of triangular in shape, in this small clearing, strange symbols on the side. They took some photos that they were subsequently told by base security, oh, they didn't come out. Not sure about that, but that's what they were told. Okay. One of them made some sketches, which we still do have, thank goodness. And then this thing took off vertically, cleared the treetops and shot away at immense speed. But what was good about it was the fact that there was the physical trace evidence, the indentations where it had landed, burn marks on the sides of the trees, but most importantly of all, radiation levels, radioactivity that the defense intelligence staff assessed was significantly higher than average background radiation levels.
Okay.
So we had physical proof.
And when the UFO was there, is it correct in saying that the UFO hovered close to the base and shot a beam of light down into the ground where there was an underground structure of the base as well?
That's part of the story, yes. I mean, what's great about this in terms of evidence and so many witnesses is that there were 3 nights of encounters. And absolutely, yeah, what you said with the beams happened. The deputy base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, he thought all this was nonsense when he heard about it. And so he was at a social function where they were handing out awards for the year. And then the doors burst open and one of the junior officers came up and saluted and said, "Sir, it's back." And he said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "The UFO, it's come back." So Colonel Holt threw together a team, went out into the forest, thought it was all nonsense, saw the UFO himself, and that's when it fired light beams down at the ground in front of him and his men.
Okay.
And he said afterwards, he said, was this a weapon? Was this a warning? Was this communication? He didn't know. And then later he saw it back over the base, firing beams that penetrated a very sensitive part of the base. And I can't even now, because of my security oath, and I can't tell you what kind of weapons they are. A lot of people are speculating, obviously, but let's just say the allegation is that those light beams impacted and had some sort of effect on the ordnance. Obviously, it didn't go bang, but it did something. We don't know what.
That the ordnance that was stored in the base.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. That's incredible. That's incredible. What about going back a little bit? When was it Peniston? When Peniston touched the UFO the first time around, or the first night, was that the first night?
That was the first night. And he kind of said, looking back, he thought it was the dumbest thing he ever did. But I guess it's human nature, curiosity. There's
Sure.
a landed UFO. Well, he kind of was so close, he just couldn't resist. He reached out his hand, he touched it, and then bang, like, clearly something, it had an effect, some, light structure within the craft went off. What he didn't say at the time, because he had one of the highest security clearances in the Air Force, and if he'd have said this, he'd have been thrown off that program, maybe
Right.
booted out of the service. But what he said years later is when he touched the side of the thing, it was like he received some sort of telepathic download of material. And then later, a couple of days later, sitting back in his home, he said it was almost like under a compulsion, and he wrote out this sequence of hundreds of thousands of ones and zeros.
Okay.
And then just put it aside for years. And it was only later, when somebody was filming him for something else, that somebody saw this in his notebook and said, "Jim, what's this?" And he was a little embarrassed because he'd never talked about it. And he said, "Well, I guess that's the message that I got." And they said, "You do know that's binary code?" And he was like, "No, I didn't really." So they gave it to a computer programmer, and they tried to decode this message, and they got this weird thing: exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, eyes of your eyes, origin year 8100. And then it gets even weirder.
8,000 what?
8,100. Like, it was almost saying that whatever this thing was had maybe traveled not just in space, but in time. And then there were these weird coordinates, which turned out to be latitude and longitude coordinates. And when they checked them against a map, they found, like, the Nazca lines in Peru, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, all these kind of ancient sacred sites. Really, really weird. No one really quite knows what it means, but it's out there.
How could that just be a coincidence? How can that just be something that people can ignore and not put together as something that should be not only followed up on, but researched? And I just feel like that's such a huge clue. And in binary, speaking of the binary, for people who don't know, a binary code is a series of ones and zeros that are sequenced to make words, correct? It's kind of like an alphabet that's decoded.
That's correct, yes. And it's used a lot in computer programming. But the really interesting thing, and this happened way after Jim came out with the story, and a lot of people were like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone communicate via binary message? And then there's this professor called, there are very few theoretical physicists doing research into time travel, but one of them is a guy called Professor Ronald Mallet. And he said, if you ever wanted to send a message back through time, you would use subatomic particles called neutrinos because they have a spin state that can be either up or down. And he said, if you can then manipulate them either into an up or down state, what you would effectively be able to do is send a binary message back through time. And so everything that you think sounds crazy, suddenly there's a professor, a physicist, who's saying something that seems to validate it.
Yeah. I mean, what's really going on? That to me is just mind-blowing that he got that. So he wasn't put under hypnosis to get that. He recalled that in a relaxed state of his own. And
yes,
then he wrote it down.
Exactly. He said it was almost like it was him, but it wasn't him. He just literally was sitting in his armchair. I think he reached for his police notebook, and just wrote it down, filled, I think, 16 pages, something like that. And then it's just like he forgot about it for, I don't know, nearly 30 years.
Wow. Unbelievable. And it was the ship itself communicating with him, not being in the ship. That's unclear.
We don't know. We
Right.
simply don't know what. Yeah, we can only speculate. I mean, a lot of people, I'm not a math expert or a code breaker or anything like that, but a lot of people have said that sometimes with these sorts of things, it's like maybe there's a message within a message. And I know a lot of people are going really deep with this so-called binary message, binary code, Rendlesham code, whatever you want to call it. So we'll see.
Okay.
Work's still going on.
That's amazing. It's so amazing. And also, before we move on from Rendlesham, for me, weren't the two soldiers involved, put under some sort of like questioning by the Men in Black? Now, on this show, we've covered the Men in Black in the past with Donald Schmidt and Roswell. He kind of brought them up for a while, but this is the next time we kind of hear about these men that are government employees checking up on the government to put the government itself in check and to limit their accountability or their memory of it, or were they silenced in any way by a third party outside of the government and outside of their own command?
It seems that they were. And again, the deputy base commander, who's pretty angry about this, he said in the days after these encounters, he said, aircraft were flying in and out, senior people were visiting. I mean, for example, the commander-in-chief of United States Air Force in Europe made a visit, took some items of evidence relating to the incident, including like soil samples that had been taken from the landing site, took them back to his headquarters at Ramstein. Kind of people in dark suits who had like access all areas passes were just coming and going with nobody knowing what agency they worked for or what exactly they were doing. And as the deputy base commander said afterwards, he said 5 witnesses. So not just Jim Peniston and John Burroughs, who was the guy most close to him at the time, but 3 others at least. He's given a statement. He said 5 young airmen under my command were subject to aggressive debriefings at which drugs and hypnosis were used. And, it's if this was just the junior people telling this story, that would be one thing. But for the deputy base commander, who retired as a full colonel with his final posting being in the Pentagon, when he's coming out and saying, yeah, this happened to the men under my command, it gets your attention.
Are we talking like an anti-truth serum drug or a memory erasing drug? What are they giving these guys?
It's not clear.
Okay.
Some people think that some elements of the encounter might have been buried deep in the witness's subconscious, and that they were maybe trying to get it out of them, what happened. Others have speculated they were trying to jumble their memories and maybe implant false memories to cover it up, or as some sort of disinformation operation. It's possible it was a bit of both, but the truthful answer is, sadly, we don't exactly know. I always try and differentiate between what I know and what I think. So we can only speculate on that one.
That's good advice. I'm going to remember that. Okay, so kind of moving on from Rendlesham, because I think that was a really amazing cover of that. I mean, that was beautiful. Thank you. But there was another event in 2001, crop circle oriented, also binary code oriented, also in England by the radio telescope. And that was in what, Chilbolton?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And there were two separate crop circles that appeared next to a radio telescope. And supposedly it was a response to a 1974 message sent by Carl Sagan, which was also in binary code, describing our genetic makeup, our physical makeup, our place in the solar system, how we communicated with them. And supposedly there was a response. And then people say, oh, that was just a hoax. What do you know about that? How valid is that? Were there multiple crop circles? What happened in 2001 in relation binary code wise?
Well, I'm generally quite skeptical about crop circles. I did look at it because of the perceived link with UFOs. I confess that I did not research and investigate the phenomenon as closely as I did with UFOs because it was technically not in our terms of reference, and we had to be quite careful about this. Right. I mean, we consistently downplayed the true extent of our interest, even on UFOs, with the media and the public. I think if it had gotten out that we were looking at crop circles, it would have been politically very difficult for the Secretary of Defense, for example. But yeah, to go to the question, yeah, I'm generally skeptical, but some of the crop formations do seem, I mean, really, really beautiful, whoever created them, and spectacular and intricate. And some of them do incorporate advanced mathematical concepts, such as fractals, for example. So you get these geometric patterns that you see in these mathematical constructs called fractals. And there are some very famous fractals which have been replicated in crop circles. One's called the Mandelbrot set, one's called the Julia set, which appeared very close to Stonehenge. As I say, I'm still a little skeptical because I think some fairly smart university students are responsible for quite a lot of this, but never say never. And yeah, like you say, Carl Sagan sent the famous message, the Arecibo message, and the radio astronomer Frank Drake has sent messages, and so we have sent messages, and the theory was that this was a reply. I have seen quite a convincing skeptical response to that, saying it doesn't really make sense because the way the location in space into which the Arecibo message was beamed, it really wouldn't have reached anyone, even at light speed, in time for a response to be sent. And also the message we got back, if the Chilbolton crop circle is to be believed, slightly changed our own message as almost like an attention getter, and for example, changed the DNA sequence, and there was a swapping out of carbon for silicon. Right. Well, now that's something you see in a lot of science fiction, but most biologists will tell you that that even though we shouldn't make a lot of assumptions about what alien life might be like, using silicon as a base is very difficult because it's all about the number of possible connections and links that you can make. I don't pretend to understand the details, but I have seen quite an effective debunking of Chilbolton. But who knows? Like I say never. And if any of this makes us think about how we would communicate with extraterrestrials, that's a good thing, even if that particular formation in the crops is a hoax. Most scientists have said, if we do communicate with extraterrestrials, mathematics will be the way we do it because it's the universal language. I mean, simply put, pi of 3.14, and on to infinity is going to be pi everywhere in the universe.
Right.
And that gives you your constants, because you can use that, and you can use sequences of prime numbers like we saw in the movie Contact. So yeah, I don't know about Chilbolton and that particular crop circle, but the principle holds true. That's exactly how we do it.
Well, that makes sense, because if they were students who are really smart doing it, they would know about pi, because I guess the numbering system that was changed also was 1 times 23 instead of a decimal system of 1 to 10. So that I thought, was also kind of too coincidental, maybe. But then the face itself too, because we have the response in binary with the breakdown of the things that were similar and not similar between us. And then we also have the breakdown of the face being a 3D image kind of on a flat surface, similar to like a printer would print out an image. So they must have been really good at crop circle making and mathematics. These guys actually had it all, and probably in the wrong business if it's a hoax, because to me, it's amazing that it's a hoax. And how long did it take to put on this piece of land? And how come someone didn't come out and say, hey, stop, what are you doing? So I feel like they would have been caught doing it also.
Well, I'll give you my skeptical theory on this, and I'll have to choose my words carefully, probably for legal reasons. But and I'm not saying it's the case here, but I have heard that some farmers, some ranchers, allow this on their land because what then happens is, you lose a couple of $100 of the value of the flattened crop. Right. But you then charge like $10 for people to come into the field and experience it. And I've heard stories of some of these people taking tens of thousands of dollars over a long, hot summer weekend with tourists coming. And so maybe on some occasions, they look the other way and allow these people to come and do these things.
Yeah, they're on the map at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it's interesting. Yeah. But again, binary is how you would communicate, because you can say that human beings, obviously, with 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand, we have a mathematical system that puts a lot of emphasis on 10. Because that's kind of what we can count up to. And then we use that as a base and we extrapolate. But what about planets where life forms have originated with different numbers of appendages, so to speak? Do you get something different? Maybe. But pi is always going to be pi, and binary is always going to be binary. So that is how you would communicate, through space and through time. So extraterrestrials and time travelers from the future, they would all probably use that.
Well, that's amazing. Okay, so shifting gears again, that was amazing. Thank you. That was a great segment. We have a choice. We can go 2 ways here. I was going to talk about the aerial school. I don't know how much you're familiar with the Zimbabwe incident was it 93? but I didn't really want to, we don't really have to talk about that. I'll tell you what I want to talk about was because I just saw Ancient Aliens with the Russia and the US involvement, and Russia having their very own Roswell. Do you mind if we talk about that? I know I didn't warn you about that.
No, well, maybe we could talk about both. I'll just very briefly.
Okay.
I mean, the Zimbabwe case is fascinating. This is the aerial school at Rua, and essentially, and everyone can check this for themselves, but a whole bunch of school children saw essentially a UFO landed, a strange figure. Some people thought that they were getting almost like telepathic messages. A lot of serious people investigated this. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but Professor John Mack from Harvard Medical School went down to investigate, interview the children, was convinced that they were completely sincere about all this. I think there's a couple of documentaries that have mentioned this, and there's probably more to come. It's a fascinating case. But happy to, I mean, Ancient Aliens is great. I love the show. I'm on it regularly. They cover a lot to do with the United States and Russia. Everyone thinks Ancient Aliens just covers like stuff like the pyramids and that sort of thing, Stonehenge. Recently, they've been doing a lot of more modern stories because the idea, I guess, is ancient astronaut theorists think that some of the ancient gods that they believe visited in the past were in fact extraterrestrials, and therefore that we built a lot of these great structures in sort of honor of these perceived gods
of the Anunnaki.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm on the show. I think it's intriguing speculation. They tend to have me on for the more modern episodes, and my goodness, with everything going on right now, this subject has pivoted from fringe to mainstream in the last 4 years. It's been on the front page of the New York Times. It's been in the Washington Post. It's been on all the major networks, and it's now being discussed in the United States Congress, where multiple UFO provisions have gone into the new defense bill. So yeah, Ancient Aliens is taking a look at some of that. You've seen, I'm sure everyone watching has seen those US Navy videos of the Top Guns kind of trying to chase these UFOs and not catching them. Russia has its own program looking at UFOs, so does China. And obviously Congress and the Pentagon is now saying, wow, we thought this was all crazy stuff, but now we realize it's real. It's a defense and national security issue. We need to be on this.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask you then, because there's a conspiracy theory that I've had for a while during my research and my readings that John F. Kennedy possibly wasn't assassinated, that he may have been killed because he inquired about possibly including Russia in on a mutual defense kind of against these aliens, or to at least say that the activity that they were seeing in their skies wasn't ours, but a party outside of them both. And I think there was a Freedom of Information Act released where he requested 10 days before his death this disclosure of alien truth. He was actually going to bring it to the forefront. Is there any truth to him inquiring about disclosure or inquiring about letting Russia in on it? Or am I just piecing things together and building up a conspiracy theory that has no credence?
Oh, I mean, those theories are definitely, a lot of people are talking about them. And there is something, and again, I think if anyone wants to check out this, they can search the internet on the phrase "the burnt memo." There's some material out there There are, though, yeah, you're right. In one sense, there's two slightly separate but related things. There is speculation that Kennedy, instead of racing the Soviets to the moon, wanted to kind of collaborate with them and go together and say, wouldn't this be a good way to set aside some of our national differences and do a collaborative space program? And I don't know how much of that was actually real as opposed to just talk or diplomacy. And I don't know how much pushback there was from within the system, but there is a debate that Kennedy did want to be more cooperative. And to be fair, a number of subsequent presidents have talked about, wouldn't it be great if we could use space to collaborate? And of course, we had the Soyuz program in the 70s where they did just that. And the two space stations docked, and the Soviet cosmonaut and the American astronaut shook hands.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say that's the way it should be. As we go out into space, we should go out together, united as people of Earth, not as Americans or Russians or Chinese or Brits or whoever it may be.
Right.
And so there's that. And then, sure, there is the theory that Kennedy was asking about UFOs. There's a related theory that Marilyn Monroe knew about it too, and that they were, I don't know about that. What I do know is that, not because Bill Clinton said it's true. He said almost every president, once they're elected, they turn around to their chief of staff and they say, come on, I want to know about the aliens. Is any of this true?
That's the first thing I would ask.
It's me too. I mean, yeah. And Bill Clinton says that is what he asked. He said, go find, actually, funnily enough, he said, there's an interview where Bill Clinton says this. He says, I asked my people to go find out who killed JFK and what's going on with the UFOs and the aliens. I don't know whether the answers he got were what he hoped for or expected, or whether he believed them, but he asked.
I wonder if he realized how connected they might be by asking those particular things too, were probably the worst two things a secret agent wants to hear from a president.
It could be. And of course they are still. I mean, now there are some other good reasons for keeping it classified, but there are still a lot of records about JFK and about a lot of things that have not been released. And in fact, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines gave a speech just a couple of days ago where she said, I think we classify things too much in the US. We should be looking to try and put more into the public domain where people have a right to know. I mean, we shouldn't be classifying things just because they're politically embarrassing or because they're difficult issues. If they genuinely harm the national interest, fine. But I know this from my 21 years in government. People always overclassify because everyone wants to be cautious on it.
Yeah, they want to keep their rep clean, and they want to keep their jobs, and they want to point blame onto other people. I mean, the whole reason why a conspiracy is a group of people with a secret plan to do something unlawful or harmful. So I kind of feel like that's what's happening with the government, keeping it a secret if they know about it, because it's created a lot of harmful things that have happened, whether we're being abducted or robbed of technology. Do you feel, and I know that our last guest, Catherine Martin, who's the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, she mentioned that, the aliens may have been giving a piece of technology to each nation to see if we can get on the same page to build something that would advance us all. Do you feel like the aliens are kind of dropping a little technology to China, a little to Russia, a little to us, a little to Britain, a little to these countries to get us all where we can be united by it and not divided by it? Or do you feel like they're trying to put us against each other? In closing, that would be my last question.
I don't know. I mean, there's one school of thought that says, technology acquisition is the prime reason for UFO secrecy. And there are a lot of people who think that the reason that the US, Russia, China are being so closed about this is that they figured out if there is alien technology out there, the nation on Earth that first acquires it and can back engineer it and use it is going to be the dominant force on this planet for the foreseeable future. So I'd like to think we would all work together, but history and human nature makes me a little bit pessimistic about that. So I don't know. If you'll excuse the pun, watch this space.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for an amazing interview. I truly have enjoyed you so much on Ancient Aliens. And this is definitely this is up there with me, man. I've been places, I've met a lot of people, but this is right at the top for me. So thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate your insight and being so honest with us. And I think you're amazing. I would love to have you back in the future for future anything. So if you're available, you got a place here.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you. And I hope everyone else has found this as fascinating as I have chatting with you. I mean, this is just fascinating times for this subject. Thank you.
Oh, and also before we go, is there anything you'd like to promote that you're working on now that you'd like people besides Ancient Aliens that people could catch you on? Or
one of my next TV appearances is it's actually the New York Post's UFO series on their YouTube channel. It's called The Basement Office, which I do with Stephen Greenstreet, who's a journalist at the Post, and we've got this series going, and so season 3 is coming out. There's more Ancient Aliens in the pipeline. Hopefully live events will be back soon, and obviously Ancient Aliens on the Road, Alien Con, is going to be a big part of that. Those are those great fan conventions that go ahead. My website is nickpope.net, and my Twitter is nickpopemod.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. Nick Pope, everybody. Nick Pope, thank you again for joining us. You made one of my dreams come true today. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Take care, man. Great
okay.
talk.
Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you too. You can find us on Apple Podcast, iHeart, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find all of our social media. On Twitter, it's Bryan_Datillo. And on Linktree, that address is @Conspiracies Inc. Podcast. Thank you for joining us.